Ja, herzlich willkommen zurück. Mein Name ist Helene Fares und wir werden gleich einen schönen Panel halten. Und zwar wird der auf Englisch stattfinden. Also wenn Sie eine Übersetzung brauchen, dann sind da hinten, wo der Herr sich meldet mit den langen Haaren. Da können Sie sich ein Gerät abholen, um simultan zu übersetzen. So, I'm going to be talking English from now on, and actually, I'm just in the place of Keiichi Matsuda right now, who would be standing here holding a keynote, but unfortunately he can't be with us today. So we're starting the 2 p.m. panel right now, which I am very blessed to share with those wonderful people standing and sitting right next to me. Maybe some of you have already read the title, Living in the Future's Narratives Stage Our World. Most stories about tech are dystopias in which machines dominate humanity, and stories, no matter if written or books or told in movies or series, have always shaped our societies. So if we tell horrible stories about the technological future, is that what's going to happen in the future? That's one of the questions that we're going to discuss today. And how do narratives shape our world? That's the main question and the title of the panel for today. I have with me some wonderful guests. Thank you all for being here. Right next to me sitting is Christiane Mietke, who's a creative producer, filmmaker, author, editor, and she recently wrote and directed the web project Homo Digitalis, which is a series that explores technologies of the future and how those technologies culturally and physically affect us humans and take us to the next step of the evolution. And she's also working on a new web series about artificial intelligence right now. Christiane Mietke. Next to Christiane, we have sitting Julia Reagan. She's a producer, director, and author from Brooklyn who has developed and produced documentaries for various major networks. She produced the series Year Million that we're going to look at later that explores what the human experience could look like in the future. Julia Reagan. Also, we have Ludwig Engel, who happens to be with us. He's a futurist and urbanist dealing with questions of long-term strategies, the future city, and urban utopias. He teaches applied futurology at the University of Fine Arts in Berlin. Ludwig Engel. Last but not least, we have Benjamin Benedikt, who is the head of high-end fiction at UFA Fiction, and he has been working with UFA Fiction since 2004, has produced various TV plays, award-winning films, and series such as Home Video, The Tower, Generation War, and numerous others. Benjamin Benedikt. Benjamin, I would like to start with you right away. You are teaming up with Michael Haneke to produce the series Kelvin's Book, and he is not very known for hopeful stories or famous for hopeful stories. So I would want to know if the story that you're going to be telling us is going to be positive or negative.
Well, that's a difficult question to start with, and of course we agreed that during development we're not going to give away too much about the story, so in a way I'm going to try to evade the question. But the interesting thing, of course, is that the moment you start developing stories about the future, you're forced to kind of interpretation already the second you undertake it. And of course that creates an interesting dynamic because you have to position yourself and towards a personal vision of the future and sort of your anticipation of it. And perhaps one of the reasons that a lot of the stories concerning the futures are rather dystopias than utopias is that for storytelling, of course, you need conflict. And so it's easily understood why you choose stories in a world where conflict is dominating. But on the other hand, stories are about change as well. And so still evading the question a little bit, it's neither the one nor the other. I think if it's a sort of a complex picture of the future, you can't decide, and it's not as simplistic as that you say it's either good or bad. It's a question of positioning yourself against different possibilities.
So you just said that we would rather tend towards dystopian narratives in our ways of telling stories. And I was wondering if there's, or if you think that there's a market for positive sci-fi where everything's blue clouds and, no, not blue clouds, but blue skies and white clouds, you know.
Well, as I just said, I mean, it's interesting. We just talked about I studied at Oxford at a college where Thomas Morris studies, who coined the term of utopia. He invented it, and his philosophical book is, of course, Utopia, meaning the place which is not there yet, in a way. So then it was sort of understood as a positive vision of the future. In terms of storytelling, the danger is that it's dull and it can become boring. It's not a question that humankind is so pessimistic. It's just that as a storyteller, you rather look for good story material. And then it can be understood that stories who are only positive turn into something which is not that interesting.
So the happy ending is over?
No, it's not over, because as nearly everything has a dynamic or a dialectic in it, I think it's the two forces working against each other. So you either position hope against despair or despair against hope, and that's what makes good storytelling.
Yeah. Ludwig, Benjamin just said that you two just had a discussion about this. What was your point of view on this matter?
We couldn't quite elaborate because we were taken to stage, but I think just to add something, I mean, of course, if you need to develop a story, you need change. So you need to have either a bad guy that turns into a good guy, or a bad situation that turns into a good. Or there needs to be some change in order to keep the audience with you. But considering Thomas Morris and the idea of utopia, it's really not about the story, but it's about how to envision a different future and how to activate people, how to actually have a sort of reformatory impetus to actually get people to change something in real world. And there's two very legitimate ways. One is to tell the people there's a paradise up ahead. We know that from lots of religions, how that works out quite darkly in the present. And the other way is to tell, well, there is a very, very dark future ahead if you don't change anything. So if you look at Orwell's 1984, if you look at Brave New World by Huxley, which is kind of the classic dystopian novels, they are not really implying that that's the dark future and that the world will change in that way, but they're really putting up a warning sign that if we continue on the path we're already on, that's going to be the future. So they're actually quite positively styled dark stories.
All right, because I, as maybe you could add later, have conquered people, scientists who actually watch sci-fi and read sci-fi and then say, ooh, that sounds interesting, might be a little devilish or something, but I want to study and see if we can go towards this way. Don't you think that there's a danger behind that?
So, I mean, there's dark scientists that read 1984 and then decided to put up a super surveillance global system. Well, that could be one option, yes. But I think the fascist system was already in place, and it just gave it a way of telling. No, Orwell was a communist, so he definitely tried to put something against nationalism and fascism. So I'm not so sure. I think in a sort of technical sense, you might be right. Like the whole meme idea that technical gadgets that we've first encountered in science fiction movies, and just because we've seen them in science fiction movies, we can actually imagine using them one day. Definitely. I think from the transponder in Star Trek to whatever, a lot of these nerdy engineers were inspired by that. But when it comes to societal change, when it comes to these big topics, I couldn't put it as undercomplex as you just trying to push it into the conversation here.
Yes, I think maybe Orwell is not the best example, but I would say that, like you just said, that that those stories try to put up a warning sign and say if you don't change something. But the risk I see is that we stop at this warning sign. So we only have this kind of dystopian ideas and futures in our head, and that might be little ideas from gadget to a little bit bigger ones. And I mean, the very concrete example I have in my mind from what Helene just said is, I've talked to a scientist who is trying to implement feelings in people's head, or not in people's, he's doing it with rodents at the moment, in rodents' head that were not there. So he's manipulating brains to make rodents feel fear, which they don't really feel in that very moment. So they're in a safe environment and they all of a sudden start to be scared. And he got this idea, he listened to Inception all the time, and he got this idea of kind of really thinking, oh, this is a cool idea, let's try this. And then all of a sudden you see, okay, you know, the DARPA, the kind of military research agency of the US Defense Ministry, they could be interested in that. And then it goes on, and then it becomes this dystopian kind of vision that has and may have implication on society.
May I reply?
Of course.
What's we're right in the discussion already. I mean, there's really 1,000 different opinions on this in this room already. But what's the alternative? Not to tell these stories anymore? Like to forbid people to think that?
No, but I think there's a danger if you only tell dystopian stories, and I think. I'm not talking now out of a storytelling perspective, because I totally agree with you. If you only tell...
What's the danger then?
I think the danger is that we will also need positive visions of the future to have an idea how we could get there. Because if we only have negative visions, then people lack imagination, I think, to see how can a good life with artificial intelligence actually look like, for example.
I would say, if I can just jump in really quickly, I would say it's kind of more nuanced than this, should we only tell good or bad stories, because I think also, science is influencing, science is influencing art, and perhaps art is influencing science right back, but it's a dynamic, right? And so it's not just, the one scientist, and it's not just the one artist who's kind of taking these concepts and saying, we need to do this one thing. But I also think that an important point is that it's impossible for us in our current moment to see the future in any other kind of outside of any other parameters except for what we have in the present moment. So the future is always going to seem slightly dystopic to us, no matter what sort of, even if we're telling a slightly positive, like a more positive narrative, it's still going to seem to our current moment like, but we have implants in our brains, but we have, even if it is sort of like something that isn't necessarily like 1984 or as extreme dystopic as that, it's still going to seem to this present moment and the way that humans in general think is like something that we're not used to. And so without getting used to it yet, everybody is going to think it's slightly dystopic, but I don't think that's necessarily bad.
But I think one reason why we see it as a dystopic future is because we have those narratives, we have those dystopian science fiction novels, and then we hear one little thing like, maybe it is possible to kind of read brainwaves. And automatically we think, they're going to manipulate our brains, they're going to read our brains, which is actually not true and far from scientific evidence. But we tend to kind of continue the stories in our head following those science fiction narratives we know from books and films.
But I would also say that, we do need to think of, no matter what the technology is, it's true, it's not necessarily going to be a mind control device, let's say, for, implants like you were talking about. Necessarily, that's not necessarily the only kind of option, but I think it's really important and vital to make sure that we're thinking about all the possibilities of our technologies, because I think scientists do that too. I think it's natural to any sort of invention, even, artificial intelligence, implants, whatever we're talking about, it's going to, this is a very obvious point, but it's vital to think about the possible negative outcomes. And so whether that's in a scientific realm or whether that's translated into art, I think it's valid in both.
Benjamin, I would like to ask you from a producer's point of view, from one of the biggest producing companies in Germany, isn't it the way that negative stories sell better?
Well, first I wanted to respond by a human point of view, because I think we're in the middle of a discussion which basically is a very basic psychological one about the evaluation of sort of human understanding and motivation, and there's no right or wrong answer to that. Is it either you're inspired by warning in a way, or are you inspired by positive images? So that's the question. What is the better one? I think from a storyteller's point of view, there is a very clear answer, which I just already gave, that only positive creates nothing. And if you be talking not about images, but about stories, it's clear that you need a negative element. There are no stories which are only positive. It doesn't, no convincing ones there is. So it's very clear that you need that. And that also leads to the answer to your question. It's not that per se negative stories sell better, but you need story sort of movement. You need story dynamic, and there has to be a way of antagonism in that. And so basically, if you think about the future, you either have a negative world and a hero going against it, or a person. It doesn't have to be sort of a hero in an old understanding of that. Or you have perhaps an utopia, and there is a danger for that. So that sounds perhaps quite technical, but it's the way how you analyze stories and then you develop stories. So on that question, yes, in order to make a convincing story, you need that per se. But I think there's another thing that perhaps you can anticipate the negative versions better, because, and there again, it's on a very basic level, but a lot of people who research on stories and why they reach out to people emotionally, of course, it's on a level of very deep and basic feelings, and obviously fear is a driving factor for that. So if you work on fears while telling stories, you have a very strong possibility, and that's the reason why, apart from all the concern about the development of society in these dystopian stories like Orwell's, etc., there's also an element why sort of telling stories about your deep fears is a way to the public. It's the same for crime or whatever. You can find it in a lot of story elements.
Okay. Julia, from the documentary point of view, now we had the science fiction point of view. From this documentary point of view, what kind of stories do you feel torn towards? More the negative or more the positive? And what picture do you want to draw in order to shape our future?
Yeah, that's a big question too. So, I mean, I think, documentary as opposed to fiction, first of all, it's impossible to make a documentary about the future.
Are we off? Sorry about this.
They agree. But so inherently, when we were thinking about the show Year Million, which is sort of a documentary about the future, right? And this as well. It's obviously impossible to make a documentary about the future. A documentary is, in definition, about the present. So really, it becomes sort of straddling that line, kind of beyond what I normally do in documentary, which of course some of it is, it's all a thought experiment, right? So it's all talking to experts and leading, people today and scientists who are working in tech and developing these different things, and then talking to them about, well, what are the possible outcomes of this? And so it does, I think depending on who you're talking to, some of the people are saying that this is, and I think that every scientist and every technologist, most people working today are trying to discover and trying to work on these things for a positive future. I mean, I very rarely was talking to somebody who is like, well, I'm making this so that we can all be subjugated and AI can take over. It's, that's no, at least I've never found that person, at least in our research. But again, like I was saying earlier, what was important is talking to them about the possible outcomes of their technologies. And the thing about our documentary is not talking about the outcomes of those in the near future, but talking, really like 10 steps beyond now. So thinking about that, it inherently has both negative and positive outcomes. And I think I've kind of lost your question, but I think that basically making a documentary about the future is impossible, and I think everybody's right now in the present working for a positive future, but inherently you must think about the negatives, and those technologies might end up having negative effects and actually being seen as, this sort of negative thing that happened once you're kind of in the future looking back. So I think, yeah.
So what made you make this documentary? Maybe we can have a little look on the big screens from one of the scenarios.
Künstliche Emotionen?
No, that's the
Lasst
wrong
uns
one.
doch mal nach Japan blicken. Da wird sie schon ausprobiert, wie
though.
Freundschaft zwischen...
Year Million is the one that we want to
I think they were just going to show some visualizations. I'm not sure if it's a clip, but
yeah,
I can
while you were
answer the
talking.
question.
Yeah.
So what made us develop this show?
Yeah.
Well, I was a series producer, so it was myself and a team of people. And I think the whole idea behind it is essentially to talk to experts in various fields, the leading minds today, and think about where these technologies can go in the far future. I mean, that's really what inspired it. And there's a series of essays in a book called Year Million that's, I think, about 10 or 20 years old at this point. And it sort of thinks about the year million in this sort of way of, year million is not the year 1 million. It's this thing that, sci-fi uses a lot of talking about sort of the far future. And so what inspired it was essentially wanting to look at all these present technologies and think about all of these possible outcomes. Because I feel like so much today you're caught in the moment of, okay, this is this technology that's coming out right now, and this is what it's going to do for us in the next year of our life and the next 2 years. And I think that, a really important thing about all sort of sci-fi and future discussions is, it's useful to think about these ultimate sort of effects that these technologies could have in the future.
So as a documentary filmmaker, usually you don't impact too much the stuff that is happening, except from, of course, having the camera in front of the person that's doing something or saying something. And you did talk to a lot of experts. What were their predictions of the future? Did you feel more positive when finishing the project, or was it 50-50?
Yeah, well, I would say I do think documentary affects the present, but it usually affects the present, not necessarily the future. And I think it has the ability to kind of get people to talk about things that they wouldn't even think that they had an opinion about, and then you watch something and you're like, actually, I don't really agree with that scientist or whatever. I think that did I feel positive or negative afterwards? I felt tired afterwards. I generally feel positive about the future. I think that this specific year that we were making it, and specifically in the United States, was difficult. And I think that 2016, 2017, when we were making it, we were kind of in maybe a different frame of mind than we would have been if we had made it like 2 years before. But I think that overall, we were very focused on overall humanity surviving in some sort of way. Whether that means, it wasn't, at least our show, for the purpose of the show, kept, these characters alive in a way of, so that, whether they were alive biologically, perhaps no, which might seem dystopic. If you're, digitally transferred over to a machine, that might seem like a negative future. But again, it was sort of these ways of imagining the far, far future where humanity still exists in some sort of way, but maybe it's not recognizable. But I don't necessarily think that's dystopic. So I would say overall I felt pretty good about the future. I think that, a lot of parts of these technologies are hard to understand, and I'm not really very excited about the concept of losing a physical body necessarily, for example, but I think that it's a really interesting kind of discussion to have with people and with these sort of scientists and people at the forefront of their field. It's fascinating, and I think it's an important...
You just said something very interesting. You said having machines being part of the human body, and your documentary is called Homo Digitalis, which would be the next step of evolution. How did you feel about actually thinking about us taking this next step of evolution which would usually take thousands and thousands of years to get through the next step? How did you feel about that being so close?
Well, when we started the work on the documentary, we kind of had this idea of we want to have a positive look, in the sense of we don't want to, say that everything is bad from the beginning, because it might be actually cool to, have implants in your head, or might be, we had this kind of positive thing. And then the more we got into the work, I have to say I personally realized that I got more and more distance to this future, and I really felt, okay, this is actually not something that I want to have. And the more I worked on it, I was unsure if that's really going to happen, or if it's not also, again, a narrative that we kind of read a lot in science fiction novels that might seem very close, but actually, like, it's in 50 or 100 years, maybe, but nobody knows what's going to happen in 50 or 100 years. And I found this old kind of documents of 50 years ago, in the 60s, where they kind of made predictions of the future. And they were really funny because they also predict the man-machine already. They predicted that we would in the 80s already be able to control weather, that we would be on Mars by now. So I realized, okay, there are some, and it was really fascinating to see how the kind of ideas and the way they were framing the future was so similar to what we hear today. So there is a narrative that goes on, and that will keep going on, and I'm actually not sure if it always helps us understanding the future. Rick?
Just as a direct reply, I actually think we're way past beyond that point where we can actually say there is going to be something like an evolutionary step or a cyborg thing in the future. We're already there. We're already cyborgs. And I think that's one of the biggest problems we have with our perception of the future today. Just a simple, very not simple, but in a conversational sense, simple thing, climate change. The pole caps are gonna melt in 20 years. They are melting right now. There is no 20 years for us to wait until something happens. We're right there. Action needs to be taken right now. And this is, I think, the same thing when it comes to digitalization or evolution of the human. We're already cyborgs. We're already very much entangled with the digital environment.
Are we cyborgs because we are so addicted to our phones, or why are we cyborgs?
We're not, some are addicted, some are not, but we're all depending on it. And so it doesn't really matter what we think. It's already part of our living ecosphere. And so I always think there needs to be the next step, and there again we come to the positive narratives. If we do accept that machines are already part of us, if we do accept that they are not technical, perfect objects that don't work like we want, but do accept them as unfinished creatures that do live with us, we can actually discuss another sort of cohabitation. And that, I think, could be a positive sort of narrative. Yeah, I call it, I wrote a little book which is called Technologies of Tenderness. And it's very much based on a video from a 70s artist that built dancing robots and put them in a room with dancers. And the robots would actually answer to the movements of the robot, and the robot iteratively would then answer to the movements of the dancer again. So it was a quite harmonic thing. The dance looked very weird because robots dance differently than we do. But still, there was a sort of harmony in the coexistence of these two entities. And I think, that's now talking like that on stage, it feels very, very strange and utopistic in a way, but I think that could be something really worth talking about instead of, we're gonna be ruled by machines or we're gonna have to destroy machines, because that's past. We can.
We still define where, it's true that we already at a certain point where we still define the future. You still have millions, billions of possible futures, and you still define it by every step you take. And so, as I said, it's a philosophical debate, and probably there's no right or wrong. I'm going to do the, advocatus diaboli, because I think it's far too simple to just have a positive view on the future, because it's only a tiny fraction of which might for sure be positive. But there's so many possible scenarios where it goes horribly wrong. And so I think you need to be aware of all these dangers. And their storytelling, again, is a very strong method. If you take something like Black Mirror, the BBC series, which is on Netflix, or Netflix overtook now, and you see what can happen to us when we get that addicted to the phone, which we are already now, but it might come to a point where everything depends on how you vote other people, and then you understand how a world like that will function. And it is a possible world. Even depending on what we see and understand today, it is a possible world. And we see it, and perhaps we react to it in a way where we say, okay, we don't want to have this happen, and then we can take action. And of course, you can, talking about climate change, you can show a world which sort of is destroyed by climate change as a warning, and perhaps that makes a stronger action than seeing a world which is just perfect in every way, and we live in paradise. And so I would make a very strong point for why these dark and grim stories have their reason.
Yes, but I think sometimes these dark stories, like as when they're fictional and they're science fiction, I would like to go to the example of artificial intelligence. And I think many people are really scared that artificial intelligence might take over the world and that it, becomes...
It will.
Yes. So I actually think that we are very far from there. And the scientists I've spoken to and the research I did kind of brought me to this point that we are really, like, we have quite of autistic machines right now that are very good in some things, but we are far from, them having like their own mind and their own will. But this scientific narratives brings us to this point that when, we see the Facebook bots like starting to talk to each other in a language that we don't understand anymore, we think, oh my God, it's already there. They're gonna do something with us. But actually, in this particular example, nothing happened. They were just, this was just code, and they would not destroy anything. Nothing would happen. But the media and like many people thought, oh my God, this is already the first step. And I think for me, this is a perfect example how these narratives leads us to an idea that seems far more scary than actually the reality is, and makes us not see some of the real dangers that I personally see, such as data, for example, or also the impact on social justice, on work, on people losing their jobs, stuff like this, because we kind of have these other fears that are written in scientific novels.
So it's a question which fear you point out, but that's a different topic. Then you say, well, you don't agree to this specific fear, but then you have perhaps another one about the future. You were referring to these texts like you read from the 60s, who sort of designed this or that future. Normally, and of course it's not a scientific method what I'm describing here, but normally if you look back like 50 or 100 years and you see it, how people prescribe the future, they were all through the total history of mankind, the majority was horribly wrong. They were all really horribly wrong, and they weren't able to foresee it. So, of course, I agree with what you say, that as a documentarist, you can't foresee the future, but it's still a narrative on the other hand. So, for example, I looked into documents at the beginning of the 20th century, and you saw, and if you think of it, like in January 1900 or whatever, and you had the progress of science, and you had sort of people communicating in other ways. And of course, there were many, many reasons for all these people to say, well, a bright, wonderful century lies before us. In Central Europe, you said, well, it's just going to get better and better. We're going to understand each other. And what ensued was this horrible, tragic sort of chain of events of the 20th century. So if you look back and you see how poor we are in anticipating our future, I still think, for me, the greater danger is to not look at the dangers that are there.
I mean,
well, I just want, because I think before you all said we cannot be positive or negative, and I never wanted to point that out, but I think that the risk is that at the present we are too negative, and that the concrete dangers we look at might not be the ones that are really kind of in front of our eyes.
Which dangers are these?
Well, we have to go to what are we talking about? If you talk about artificial intelligence, I would say artificial intelligence is really good in reading vast amounts of data and understanding that better. So this is something that, yes, we talk about Cambridge Analytica, but artificial intelligence usually is only mentioned on the sideline. So this is one danger. Another danger I see is in military, and not necessarily that kind of machines will become automatic and have their own will, but just make mistakes, or there's a little problem in the machine, and then all of a sudden automated weapons become dangerous. So, and the third one, this is just very general. The third one is social justice and what will happen. Not necessarily robots taking over jobs, but companies building big monopolies, such as Amazon, for example. And
all of these would be great dystopian stories, which you mentioned. It would be great.
There are dangers in there, but I think what we really need is to have to kind of see the dangers, and then also kind of think about solution and have stories about solutions.
I think the critical point here is somewhat different, because you're suggesting that the same people that actually cheer on their own worldview while watching some video online are actually the ones that are critical minds enough to accelerate this sort of process. And my point is, this works for everything. Every piece of news works like that. A negative piece of news that somehow gives the guy who reads it sort of strong opinion on his own worldview works perfectly. We've seen that over the last couple of months and years perfectly. So it's not really a problem that concerns the future or any proliferation of current technologies. The thing that Benjamin already mentioned a couple of times is usually if you really work with the future, you work with scenarios, you work with futures, plural. You work with the insight that you cannot know anything about the future, so you can just potentially aggregate some facts and come up with a variety of different scenarios of how a certain topic might pan out in that future. And with that, you sort of create an open future. That is, you make current ideas about the future so transparent that people that actually are interested in how this future might pan out can look at all the different angles and ways you kind of constructed these scenarios and say, well, this seems more probable to me as that, but I understand that all these scenarios are just as probable.
But is science that transparent?
Well, let's say that thing is so complex that you can't put it into the media as something that anyone is interested in. And that's the thing, simple truths. Simple truths work so much better. And so whenever you come up with something about engaging with the world, as soon as you have a room filled with educated people, there is no question that there needs to be something done, that there is not such a negative future ahead, that people are optimistic. That's not a problem. I really don't see the problem with that proliferation of a bad story that is turned into a bad technology that usurps the world. I'm still at that point. Sorry.
I never meant it in that very simple way, but I mean, you just said the problem is how to put it into the media and into the wider public, and that's kind of the feeling I have if you look into like what we read in the newspaper, and also kind of a big part of the stories that we hear tend to be a little bit more dystopian and tend not to have this variety of different views on the future that you just pointed out. And that's the issue I'm having, because I think that we need this different kind of versions, and we kind of, because the dynamics of media work in the way they do, because it's easier to sell a scandal, it's easier to sell bad stories. Yeah. That's the reality.
Look at a celebrity magazine. All of the celebrities are happy with their partners, have no problems. Well, great. Nobody's going to read that.
Yes.
I mean, it's not the worldview. The realistic worldview is a bit pessimistic.
I think it's inherently actually two separate, like, there's just this difference, right, where when we talk about fiction, we talk about art, the bottom line for those outlets are artists' responsibility isn't necessarily all of humanity's future, right? I mean, when you're writing a story or when you're creating a film, it's not that one artist's responsibility to kind of, I think, take on everyone in the entire world's lives. But I think documentary can be different in the sense of, I think what you're saying is just portraying one vision of it, meaning, like, as a documentarian, you're talking about what's happening now, right? You're talking about possible futures, and you're kind of grounding it in facts, and you're worried that maybe some of these other sort of results of this scientific discovery, whatever it might be, aren't being discussed. But I think, when you're writing fiction or things like that, or making narrative films, or Black Mirror, for example, I mean, all of those things are extremely important, because I think it shouldn't be, again, we should have both of those. I think it's just like, it's a very, like, you don't need.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, and documentary as a medium is going to have different kind of rules and regulations than writing a sci-fi story or making a narrative film. I think that, you kind of have different sort of freedoms in both.
Totally, and I never want to say, oh no, I love Black Mirror. I never want to say, oh no, I don't want to have this kind of stories. They're great. I think all I'm saying is we have to look at what does it do with society and what does it do in the people's brain to only have this kind of stories. And I mean, the dynamics behind it are very clear, like what you said. Those stories sell better. But we kind of, if you look into the implications of what people see today and which kind of actions they kind of might take or might not take, then I think there is a problem that we have a misperception here of the future following only one kind of type of, or not following a certain type of narrative.
I think we talked about fiction right now. Maybe we can have a little look at Christiane Mietke's film, or a little part of the film Homo Digitalis, where we are in Japan, where we show the actual person living the future. Or not. There we go. I think we need
Da wird
sound.
sie schon ausprobiert, die Freundschaft zwischen künstlicher Intelligenz und dem Menschen. Japaner haben einfach eine andere Haltung zur Technik. In der japanischen Popkultur sind Roboter nicht böse, sondern süß. Schaut euch Astro Boy an. Für viele Japaner haben auch Maschinen eine Seele.
In Japan sehen wir auch in den ersten Studien, da gibt es eine bestimmte Gruppe, die einen sehr starken Bezug haben zu Anime, zu Manga, auch zu Computerspielen. Und bei denen sehen wir schon eine signifikant höhere Akzeptanz für sowas wie virtuelle Ehefrauen oder Sexroboter und gleichzeitig auch mehr Skepsis, mehr Ängste gegenüber realen Beziehungen.
Ein bisschen ist das auch bei Lisa so. Sie hat viele Freunde, die meisten davon virtuell. Manchmal fehlt Lisa dann doch der Kontakt zu echten Menschen. Dann geht sie zu einer Agentur und mietet sich eine Freundin. So eine Mietfreundin kostet ein bisschen mehr als 100 € am Tag. Für Lisa nicht so viel. Sie hat 2 Jobs, arbeitet oft 16 Stunden am Tag, so wie viele andere Japaner auch. Aber die wenigsten mieten sich dann gleich einen Menschen. Der Vorteil eines Lebens mit virtuellen und gemieteten Freunden ist natürlich, dass Lisa bestimmen kann, wie nahe sie jemanden an sich heranlässt.
そんな前、本当にリアルな友達だと気使って言いたいこと言えないし、楽しくない時に楽しくないってやっぱ言えないじゃないですか。けどレンタルフレンドだから自分が行きたいところに行って一緒に楽しんでくれて、自分が好きな時に帰れるんで一番気楽だなと思って自分らしく入れます。
Der Höhepunkt für Lisa? Das Maiden-Café. Ein Rollenspiel-Restaurant. Für mich sieht das alles aus wie ein Manga. Aber was ist schon real und was virtuell? Vielleicht ist das für uns alle irgendwann das Gleiche.
家に帰ってその2次元の恋人に会うのが楽しみで、なんかリアルな人と違って傷つけないし、なんか疲れて家に帰ってきてもよく頑張ったねとか帰ってきたらもうニヤッとして一日の疲れが取れたみたいな。
Thank you very much for bringing this with us, with you. So with Lisa, we had the perfect example of someone who has a virtual boyfriend, but also wants actual contact to a person that acts like a friend but is not a real friend. How would you say have narratives changed the culture in Japan, and why are they more open towards new technologies?
Well, I think, the reason why we decided to show this specific part is that you can really see in Japan a different narrative where the kind of robot is more the family member or the mother, and not so much the kind of, machine that destroys you. And you can really see the impact this is having on the society in that sense, people like Lisa, it's not every Japanese person goes and rent a friend and has like a virtual boyfriend, but I think it's a lot more accepted. I think for her it was very normal and open to talk to us in that way and saying, yes, no, I don't have many friends and I don't, like last time I saw them was half a year ago, that's fine, I don't feel embarrassed or anything. And I think for me this was a very interesting way how we could see the power kind of stories and narrative, and in this case mangas, and have on actually the life of people.
So we also saw in the documentary that the cultural background for the Japanese people is actually different, and the reason why they accept technologies is based in the culture. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I mean, I think we have to be very careful not to generalize totally, but I mean the specific example we were giving that I found very interesting is Astro Boy, which is a young little robot boy that fights for freedom, and that, you know, is really portrayed like a human boy, but is a robot. And I think those kind of stories together with a religious aspect of Shintoism, where, you know, the belief is that there's a soul in everything, so also a machine can have a soul. I think that brings together a very different way of seeing, like, abstract thing, like seeing a machine, of interacting with it, and then can we see all, I mean, there are lots of other examples of, you know, people having those little robot dogs at home and then being so attached that they actually have a funeral with those robot dogs, for example. And even though this technology is not more necessarily that much more advanced than it is here, the acceptance is just a lot higher.
So, Ludwig, you as a futurologist, I came across also in this documentary, I came across a phenomenon, a psychological phenomenon called Uncanny Valley, which means that when people come across technologies that are too human-like, they get scared and they don't want to have anything to do with this technology. How can we overcome this Uncanny Valley?
Well, I mean, the thing about Uncanny Valley that it's just, if it's slightly off, that's the scary thing. No, this is why horror, puppets, and clowns work so perfectly. That's the Uncanny Valley effect, because the grin is somewhat off. You know, the entire human appears to be human, but then it's not. And I guess there's two ways. One is to find perfection, to actually create a Blade Runner-like world in which you can't tell what is a human and what is a robot anymore. And the other one is to develop ways of how a robot could actually develop its own idea of existence and how that could complement our existence. It's, you know, we all like R2-D2 because he's just like this super nice little guy. You know, he's a bit, you know, he has his own mind. But the big problem is he only works for us through 3PO. If we wouldn't have the translating robot, we wouldn't have any idea what that little flipping guy is up to. And so and we don't really like C3PO. You know, he's arrogant, you know, we don't like him, but we need him.
I like him.
You like him?
I like him. I like both.
Oh, you like both, okay. So at least, you know, he's sort of our medium. And he definitely has a sort of uncanny valley-ness to it. And yeah, so I guess one way would be, if we can't perfect the robots, if we don't want to have replicants, then we maybe have to go to school and learn how robots are, and then kind of find a way of dealing with them on a daily basis.
So would you rather say we would have to make our robots more human-like so we can accept them, or would you say we would have to make them look like R2-D2 to see this is a robot and I can, you know, talk to this robot as a robot and not talk to it as a human?
I mean, like if we have a long panel, so I do an elaborate answer. So, I mean, one thing how to get rid of the uncanny valley is to kind of shrink robots to children's size, because something that is small doesn't scare us.
Yeah.
You know, if R2-D2 would be the size of an elephant, you know, his bleeping
Scary.
wouldn't be so sweet anymore. So that's one strategy that we use at the moment, just to sort of get into interaction mode with machines. There's one Asimo, no, not an Asimo, but a Pepper robot in the back area, you know, this little robot thing with the big screen here. It's small as well, it has big eyes, everybody loves it. It can't do nothing, but you love it because it's so nice. And so I guess, you know, you need to somehow get over that effect. You need to get out of this uncanny valley conflict that you either have to make the robot nice or that you have to make it just as human-like as we can bear it. We need to come up with a new way of how to give robots their own sort of autonomy, in the sense that we don't judge them after us anymore. And I, like Bruno Latour, wrote a nice riff on Frankenstein, which is called Colossus, and this is where this quote comes from: "We need to perceive machines as unfinished creatures." And I think that's super important, that we kind of give them that sort of animistic role the Japanese automatically do through religion, that we sort of get a new mindset to come there.
Yeah, I think I would like to agree. I think it's very important to answer your question that machines are not humans, and I don't think they will ever be. And I think as long as we kind of have this idea of, oh yeah, this is, you know, they're gonna be like us, they're gonna replace us one day, we kind of miss the chance of finding a way what actually could be a good relationship to a machine. How could this machine help me in a non-human way? How could be a kind of completely different relationship look like, human to robot?
Yeah.
I think a good thing about storytelling, and that's part of our main topic, is that actually, for me, good storytelling leaves you a choice as an audience. You don't prescribe, you have to feel this or that, but you're open to relate. And in that way, even if it was a documentary, it was great storytelling for me, because the example of the Japanese woman, because she was enthusiastic about it, she didn't criticize it. I was able to make my own decision and see whether I like this kind of life or whether I don't like it. And I think good storytelling, thinking about scenarios as well, it's great that we have both Blade Runner and Star Wars, because it helped me relating to which world I'd rather sort of choose, and which I can define by sort of the time I have sort of defining this world. And so I think that is a good, and that makes strong storytelling as well. And there, it goes beyond just being good or bad, but the more nuanced is it, and the more it leaves you open to choose what you think, then it's better, and it proves a reaction. And I had that when I saw that part, and it could be a great part of a great episode of Black Mirror as well. That one,
Yeah.
you could really elaborate and do it, and have some kind of story, and then you make a decision on how you want to relate with robots. And do you want to perceive them as being same to you, or do you want to perceive them as different? I'd rather go for the later sort of option, but that's open. Yeah.
If you talk again about narratives, there are a lot of films that portray robots as humans. And I think very often if you talk to people or if you read media, like just journalistic text, kind of having this image of, oh yes, they're going to be human-like. Yeah. And I think that's one example of a narrative that maybe it is like, I would tell dystopian kind of future, that is actually misleading us. I think that's another example of what I meant before. But I think, in a sense, I agree with you that it is too simple to call it dystopian or not dystopian. But
it's good if it leaves you choice. I think for Blade Runner is a great example, because it's not that simple, and you still, in the end, sort of you have these discovery, and you might even feel for the robots, but perhaps it's their problem to be too human, and so that gives you something to think about.
Well, and I also think that it was nice to see that clip, because to me, it isn't necessarily a positive view. I mean, it's the present, it's not even the future, right? So it's not even necessarily a positive view. So it's nice to see, like, okay, so even if that person feels, I mean, just like Benjamin's saying, even if that person that we're following feels good about it, that doesn't necessarily mean the audience feels good about where we're going. So I think that it's all, yeah, so it's, you know, I think that it's nice to see that example, because it's not necessarily this is all positive. It's just that person might feel positive, but the audience might feel like,
the audience did actually feel scared. I mean, when watching and looking at the comments on Facebook and on YouTube, to that clip, especially to that clip, people were so scared. They were saying, those crazy Japanese people, because of course it's a generalization, that's very bad, of course, but there were so many people saying that they're so scared of this happening to their own children because they see their children on their phones and they think, are those virtual friends that they're talking to? And maybe it's actually the point of educating more, and what you said, educating the people on what's going to happen, what might happen, and what will not happen probably.
I mean, but I'm sorry, but that's the point. It's not the opinion of the people, it's the opinion of the people that post comments on YouTube.
Of course.
And that really makes a difference, I think.
Yeah.
And so the educational thing, I think, is very important.
Yes, but I think maybe the work on this kind of series brought me to this opinion that I kind of expressed here today, is because we made this film and we kind of specifically didn't want to say this is good or this is bad. We kind of left it open so that people could make up their own mind. And I realized when presenting it, when having discussions either online or in real life, that people were scared and that I couldn't give any answers of kind of how, like if this future were going to happen, how to avoid it. Or like I always said, yes, we can still shape the future, but I couldn't tell myself, like how can we actually do this and what would be a good way. And so I realized that I am missing, and I think everybody else I was talking to as well was missing these ideas of how could that actually be possible. And I think it is both important to do this kind of films where you kind of really say, put up a warning sign and say, here's a real danger, but to also go this next step and kind of find different solutions to actually give people ideas what they could do.
To make them understand, I mean, basically fiction is about what it means to be human, and if you sort of help of defining that, and that's never one definition, it's an ongoing process for everybody, and I think if you start that discussion, that's good storytelling, and normally if you're too prescriptive, it's bad.
Yes, but I'm not talking about fiction and necessarily only storytelling in the kind of very kind of strict sense of a fiction film, right?
Even documentaries are storytelling. I mean, you still tell a story. You told a story in that clip.
Yes, but you can still go beyond. I mean, we did not do this in this series, I have to say, but you can still, I think, do this both in a journalistic way and also documentary, maybe also in fiction, I don't know, to kind of find ways of portraying different solutions in a non-too descriptive way.
I think, Christiane, you put it all very well together in the last thing you just said, that it needs to be more vagued out. And I just want to, because we don't have any more time, I'm sorry about this, I think we could go on for hours. I just want to thank you all for taking part in this and thank you all for being here. And jetzt kurz auf Deutsch, hier auf Bühne 6 diskutieren gleich die Digitalstrategen, wie man erfolgreich mit Netflix, Amazon und Facebook konkurriert. Und Julia Regan is gonna be in the Meet the Speaker area at the first floor, and you can meet her in 15 minutes there. So if you have a question, because we didn't have any more time to ask questions to our speakers right now, you can go meet her here and there, sorry. Thank you very much for talking to me. Thank you for listening.